It was a cloudy morning when Marie Collins walked into the family court. She held her head high, feeling the weight of everything on her shoulders. She was here to demand justice. Her ex-boyfriend, a man named David Taylor, had not supported her financially after their son was born. It had been a long, hard year for her. Raising a child on her own was exhausting, both emotionally and financially. Today, Marie was ready to make sure David paid child support. She had waited too long. David arrived at the court a few minutes later. He looked calm, though there was a sadness in his eyes. He didn't say much as he sat down, avoiding Marie's angry glance. He had tried to talk to her before, but she never gave him a chance. Now everything would be decided in front of the judge. As the judge entered the courtroom, everyone stood. Judge Williams was known to be fair, but tough. She looked over the case file briefly and asked Marie to speak first. Marie stood up, her voice steady but full of frustration. She told the judge how David had abandoned her when she was pregnant, how he never once helped with their child's expenses, and how she had been forced to manage everything alone. She spoke about working 2 jobs just to pay rent and buy food for her son. "I am not asking for anything extra," she said firmly. "I just want what my child deserves." The judge nodded and turned to David. "Mr. Taylor, do you have anything to say?" David took a deep breath and stood up slowly. "Your Honor, I never refused to support Marie or the child. But—" His voice trailed off for a moment, and he seemed hesitant to say more. The courtroom grew silent. Everyone waited to hear what David had to say next. "But, Your Honor," David continued, "I don't believe the child is mine." His voice was soft but firm. There were gasps from the people in the courtroom, and Marie's eyes widened in shock. She had not expected him to say that. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying you want a paternity test, Mr. Taylor?" "Yes, Your Honor, I do," David replied quietly. Marie's face turned red with anger. "This is just another way for him to avoid responsibility," she shouted. But the judge raised her hand, signaling for silence. "We will order a paternity test," Judge Williams said calmly. "The truth will clear things up." The judge scheduled the test for the following week, and the courtroom was dismissed. Marie stormed out, her heart racing with anger and disbelief. She couldn't believe David would question the paternity of their child after all this time. David left quietly, his face unreadable. The days leading up to the test were difficult for Marie. She thought about every moment she had shared with David before things fell apart. They had been so in love once, or at least she thought they had. But now everything felt like a lie. How could he doubt their child's paternity? Meanwhile, David spent those days in silence, not sharing his thoughts with anyone. He knew he had a reason for his doubts, but he hadn't told anyone, not even Marie. The truth weighed heavily on his heart, and he wasn't sure how things would turn out. On the day of the test, Marie and David both arrived at the clinic. The nurse swabbed their mouths and collected samples to compare with the child's DNA. It was a simple process, but it felt like an eternity. Marie avoided looking at David the entire time. She just wanted the truth to come out so she could move on. The results would take a few days, and both of them had to wait anxiously. Marie tried to focus on her work and her child, but her mind kept drifting back to what David had said. She couldn't understand why he would doubt her. David, on the other hand, spent the next few days in quiet reflection. He thought about the night Marie told him she was pregnant, and how things between them had changed so quickly afterward. He had always wondered if there was something she wasn't telling him. When the day of the hearing arrived, both of them returned to court. The courtroom was filled with tension as Judge Williams opened the envelope containing the DNA test results. She read the results carefully before looking up at the two of them. "The test confirms that Mr. Taylor is not the biological father of the child," the judge said calmly. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Marie's face turned pale, and she shook her head in disbelief. "That's impossible," she cried. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to process the news. David sat quietly, his expression filled with both sadness and relief. He had suspected this for a long time, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. He had loved Marie once, and part of him had wanted to believe that the child was his. Judge Williams banged her gavel, calling for silence. "I understand this is difficult," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But the DNA results are clear. Mr. Taylor has no legal obligation to pay child support. Marie sobbed quietly, her hands shaking. She had been so sure. How could the test be wrong? Then, out of nowhere, she whispered, "There has to be a mistake. I never, I never thought." Her voice trailed off as realization dawned on her. There was only one other person it could be. David looked at her with a mix of sadness and understanding. "I just wanted the truth, Marie. I wasn't trying to hurt you." Marie nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "I'm sorry, David. I made a mistake." The courtroom fell silent again as the weight of her words sank in. Judge Williams looked at both of them with a compassionate expression. "Sometimes the truth is painful," she said softly. "But now that it's out, you both have a chance to move forward." David stood up and gave Marie one last look before leaving the courtroom. There were no harsh words, no anger, just a quiet acceptance that things were not meant to be the way they once seemed. Marie sat there for a moment longer, holding her hands tightly together. She knew that moving forward wouldn't be easy, but at least now, the truth was out, and she could start over with a clean slate. And with that, the case was closed. Not with anger or resentment, but with a quiet understanding that life doesn't always go the way we expect. But even in the hardest moments, there's always a chance to find peace.